I was tired, muddy around the boots, and genuinely looking forward to seeing my wife Elena and our son Caleb. Maybe order pizza, maybe watch something stupid on TV together. The ordinary pleasures of an ordinary man who believed with his whole chest that his ordinary life was enough. I heard voices before I even reached the kitchen. 2 voices, and then a third I recognized immediately. Deep, smooth, the kind of voice that fills a room without trying. My cousin Dorian. I stopped in the hallway. He works himself to nothing, Elena was saying, and there was a contempt in her tone I had never heard directed at me before. Or maybe I had and had been too trusting to hear it clearly. Asterisk, he thinks pouring concrete and managing construction crews is some kind of noble calling. Meanwhile, you're closing real estate deals worth more than he'll earn in 10 years. Asterisk. He's always been that way, Dorian said. And I heard the smirk without seeing it. Asterisk, good Logan. Steady Logan. Boring Logan. Asterisk. Then Caleb, my son, my boy, the kid I had coached through Little League and helped with algebra homework and sat beside in the emergency room when he broke his wrist, said, asterisk. I'm embarrassed when he picks me up from school in that truck. Dorian drives a Porsche. Asterisk. I stood in that hallway for what felt like a full minute. The coffee in my hand had gone cold. Or maybe I had. I did not walk in. I turned around and walked back out the front door, sat in the truck Caleb was ashamed of, and stared at the rain streaking down the windshield. And then something happened inside me that I can only describe as a door closing. Not slamming. That would come later. Just a quiet, definitive click. The sound of a man realizing that the people he loved most had decided he wasn't worth loving back. Let me tell you about Dorian, because you need to understand what I was dealing with. We grew up together, same family gatherings, same grandmother's house at Christmas. He was always flashier, always charmed, always managed to make every room feel like it existed just to accommodate him. His father had invested in real estate in the 90s and rode the wave perfectly, leaving Dorian a portfolio worth several million before he was 30. Dorian hadn't built a single thing. He'd inherited everything, then leveraged it. And the world called him successful and called me modest. I never resented him for it. That was the thing. I genuinely never did. I had married Elena years ago, and I had loved her the way a man loves when he has nothing held back. I worked double shifts when Caleb needed braces. I took on side jobs in brutal summer heat to pay for Elena's mother's surgery when insurance fell short. I drove that truck Elena hated because it was paid off and reliable, and I was saving for a house deposit. I thought we were building something. I thought we were a team. Dorian had started coming around more often lately. Dinners, dropping by, always with some gift, some story, some effortless charm. I had invited him in. He was family. I trusted him completely because I was the kind of fool who confused blood with loyalty. I drove to a diner that night and ate alone and thought very carefully about what I was going to do. I went back home after dark. Elena was already in bed. Caleb in his room. I lay beside her in the dark and listened to her breathe and felt the full weight of what I now knew. She didn't love me. Maybe she had once. But somewhere along the line, she had decided that Dorian's world was better than mine, and she had started building a bridge toward him while I was out pouring concrete to pay for the life she was living. I didn't confront her that night. I waited. The next morning, while Elena was in the shower and Caleb was still asleep, I went to the home office and opened the shared laptop. I had never snooped before, never felt the need to. Now I felt only the cold logic of a man who needed to know the full scope of what he was dealing with. It took me less than 6 minutes to find the messages. They had been talking for 8 months. 8 months of Dorian calling her beautiful, promising trips, describing the apartment he was going to get in the city. 8 months of Elena writing back things that made my jaw tighten until my teeth ached. And then she had written, asterisk, I just need you to be patient. I'm going to talk to Logan about a divorce soon. Caleb already prefers being around you anyway. We'll figure out the rest, asterisk. I took photographs of the screen with my phone. Every single page. I forwarded the photographs to my personal email, and then I closed the laptop exactly as I had found it. I went to the kitchen and made breakfast for the family. I set the table. I poured orange juice. When Elena came downstairs in her robe, I smiled at her and asked if she'd slept well. When Caleb appeared, I asked about his homework. I ate my eggs in silence and listened to them talk about a restaurant Dorian had recommended, and I did not let a single thing show on my face. Then I drove to work and called a divorce attorney from the parking lot. Her name was Patricia Runn. and she had a reputation for being thorough and unmerciful. I sat across from her that afternoon and laid out everything I knew. She looked at the photographs I'd taken and nodded slowly in the way that professionals nod when they see exactly what they expected to see. She told me the messages constituted evidence of an ongoing emotional affair at minimum, and that I should document everything, freeze nothing yet, and say nothing to Elena until the paperwork was ready to serve. How long? I asked. 2 weeks, she said. Be patient. Patience. My whole life had been patience. I had another 2 weeks in me. I spent those 2 weeks in a kind of eerie double life. I went to work. I came home. I sat at dinner. I watched Dorian visit twice more, and both times I shook his hand and offered him a beer and watched him believe that I had absolutely no idea. He was a confident man, Dorian. His confidence had never been tested by anything real, and it showed in how easily he sat in my house and looked at my wife like she was already his. On the second visit, Caleb asked Dorian if he could ride in the Porsche to school sometime. Dorian laughed and said, "Of course." I watched my son grin at my cousin with the uncomplicated admiration he had stopped showing me, and I drank my beer and said nothing. I had stopped feeling the pain of it by then. What I felt instead was very quiet and very focused. The divorce papers arrived on a Thursday. Patricia had moved efficiently. The filings cited emotional infidelity with documented evidence, unreasonable behavior, and irreconcilable breakdown of the marriage. The financial disclosure requests were attached. Elena had access to our joint accounts, and Patricia had advised me the week before to establish a separate account and redirect my direct deposit there, which I had done. The joint account had been left with enough in it to avoid raising suspicion, but every cent I had earned in those 2 weeks was now sitting somewhere Elena couldn't reach. I had the papers served to Elena at 2 in the afternoon, while Caleb was at school and she was home alone. I know because I was parked half a block away and watched the process server walk up the path. I wasn't there for drama. I just needed to see it for myself. The moment the comfortable fiction she'd been living in collapsed into the real world. I called her 3 minutes after the server left. She picked up on the second ring and said my name in a voice I had never heard from her before. Thin. Almost small. You know, she said. It wasn't a question. I've known for 2 weeks, I said. I know about the messages, all of them. I know what you wrote about Caleb preferring Dorian. I know you were planning to ask me for a divorce anyway. I just decided to go first. She started to say something, started to try to explain, but I cut her off. Elena, I said, and my voice was very calm. I don't need an explanation. I need you to speak to your lawyer. Patricia Wren has already filed. Have a good afternoon. I hung up and drove to the construction site to finish the afternoon shift. She called 11 times that evening. I answered once, briefly, to tell her that any communication about the divorce should go through the attorneys and that I would be sleeping at a colleague's place until further notice. She said we needed to talk, that it wasn't what I thought, that she could explain everything. I told her I had read every message and there was nothing left to explain. Then I hung up again. Dorian called the following morning. I let it go to voicemail. His message was surprisingly short for a man of his confidence. He said he thought we should talk, that things had gotten complicated, that he hoped I knew it wasn't personal. I saved the voicemail and forwarded it to Patricia with a note asking whether it constituted any form of relevant admission. It did. Now here's where I need to tell you about something that was happening around this same time. Because while my marriage was disintegrating and my cousin was redecorating the ruins, another part of my life was moving in a direction I hadn't anticipated. Months before all of this, I had been brought in to manage the renovation of a historic commercial building in the downtown district. The building was owned by a company called Callaway Holdings, and the project had a significant budget and ambitious timelines. On the third week of the project, I had a site meeting that included a representative from Callaway Holdings, a woman named Lily. She wasn't what I expected. The Callaway name carried weight in the city. Old money, serious real estate, well known in business circles. I had expected someone polished and distant. She was polished, yes. She dressed with an understated precision that spoke of genuine confidence rather than performance. But she was also direct and technically informed. She asked questions about load-bearing structures and material sourcing that genuinely surprised me. She listened to the answers carefully. She did not talk down to the workers on site, and they respected her for it. We worked together on the project for months, completely professionally. She had come out of a difficult relationship of her own. I learned this only later. And I was still at that point a married man who believed in his marriage. We were two people who respected each other's competence and left it at that. When my marriage fell apart, I didn't tell her. We were still in contact about the building project, which was nearing completion, and I kept things clean and professional. But I'm a terrible liar in the long run. One afternoon, about 3 weeks after I'd served Elena the papers, Lily and I were reviewing finishing details on site, and she stopped mid-sentence and looked at me and said, "Asterisk, you look like someone who's been carrying something very heavy for a long time." Asterisk. I looked back at her and said, "Asterisk, I'm going through a divorce." Asterisk. She nodded once, slowly, the way people do when a thing confirms something they'd already quietly sensed. "I'm sorry," she said, and she meant it without prying. "Don't be," I said. Asterisk, it's the right thing. Asterisk. She went back to the blueprints. But something had shifted. The air between us was no longer quite so strictly professional. It had become human. In the meantime, the divorce proceedings moved with the speed of documented evidence. Elena had retained a lawyer, but the messages were damaging, and the financial separation I had executed cleanly meant there were no joint assets she could leverage to complicate things. Patricia Wren was thorough. Elena's lawyer was decent, but clearly working with a difficult hand. Dorian, to his credit, did not try to insert himself further. I suspected he was beginning to calculate what Elena, as a divorced, financially reduced woman, actually meant for his life, and the calculation wasn't flattering. He was a man who liked beautiful situations. A contested divorce with a betrayed husband holding documented evidence was not a beautiful situation. I heard through mutual family members, who called me with concern, and occasionally with something that sounded uncomfortably like morbid curiosity, that Dorian had become somewhat cool toward Elena since the papers were served. He was still technically seeing her, but had begun to create distance, citing the drama and the complications. My aunt called me one Sunday and said carefully, asterisk, "Logan, I want you to know that what Dorian did was wrong. I raised him better than that." Asterisk. I thanked her and didn't say anything unkind. She was a good woman and she hadn't done anything wrong. Caleb was the part that hurt most consistently. He was living with Elena during the proceedings, which was appropriate. But our calls were awkward. He hadn't apologized for what I'd overheard. He didn't know I'd heard it. But I could tell he felt the weight of having chosen a side without fully understanding what the war was even about. I told him I loved him. I told him that wouldn't change. I told him he was allowed to feel whatever he felt. He said, asterisk, "Are you mad at me?" Asterisk. I said, asterisk, "No, bud. I'm not mad at you." Asterisk. That was true. He was 14 and impressionable and had been shown a shiny thing and had reached for it the way any kid might. My grief about it was real, but my anger was reserved for the adults who had manufactured the situation. The divorce was finalized in 4 months. Patricia had negotiated well. I kept my tools, my savings, my truck. We had no shared property. The house was rented. Elena and Caleb stayed in it. I had already moved into a decent apartment near the site of my next project. The settlement was clean. I walked out of it diminished in the sense that all divorces diminish a person, but intact. And then I got to work. I want to be clear, what happened next was not purely about revenge. I had spent enough time in that hallway, metaphorically speaking, standing still while the world reconfigured itself around me. I was 36 years old. I was good at my work. I had contacts, skills, a rep on job sites across the city for delivering under budget and ahead of schedule. What I had never done was use any of that aggressively in my own interest, because I had always been building towards something that turned out not to be there. Now I had nothing to protect and nothing to lose, and a very clear idea of what I was capable of. I registered as a sole trader and then, a few months later, incorporated properly. Logan Harrow Construction. Lily had given me a professional reference, entirely appropriate, which opened a conversation about a much larger project Callaway Holdings was developing on the east side of the city. A mixed-use development, significant scale, the kind of contract that normally goes to an established mid-size firm. She told me the tender was open and that she thought I should put in for it. I put in for it. I spent 2 weeks on that tender document. I pulled in a structural engineer I'd worked with for years, a project coordinator I trusted completely, and an architect who owed me a favor from a job where I'd saved his timeline. We submitted a proposal that was technically detailed, financially transparent, and realistically scheduled. We were not the cheapest bid. We were the most credible one. We got the contract. The day I signed it, I was sitting in the Callaway Holdings boardroom with Lily and two of her senior associates. When the last signature was done and the folders were closed, she looked across the table at me with something that was part professional satisfaction and part something else, something that had been quietly building for over a year of working alongside a person and finding them consistently worth knowing. "Dinner," she said, to mark the occasion. "Yes," I said. That was the beginning of it. We were both careful people who had both been hurt before, so we went slowly. But the thing about two careful people who are genuinely right for each other is that the slowness doesn't kill the momentum. It just makes it more certain. By the time a few months had passed, I was sure of what this was. And so was she. Lily was the heir to Callaway Holdings in the practical sense. Her father had stepped back from active management, and she ran the company with a precision and vision that had grown its portfolio considerably. She was also, separate from all of that, one of the most intelligent and grounded people I had ever spent time with. She had no interest in performance. She had no interest in impressing people who weren't worth impressing. She evaluated things on their actual merit, and she did the same with people. She had evaluated me, it turned out, and found me worth keeping. She met Caleb on a carefully arranged afternoon, when he'd come to stay with me for a weekend as per the custody arrangement. She was easy with him, not performing warmth, just genuinely interested in who he was. She asked about his interests and actually listened to the answers. She didn't try to win him over. By the end of the afternoon, he was talking to her voluntarily, which was more than he did with most people. On the drive back to Elena's, he said, "Asterisk, she seems like a real person." Asterisk. I said, "Asterisk, she is." Asterisk. He was quiet for a moment. Then, asterisk, "I'm sorry, Dad. About what I said about the truck." Asterisk. I glanced at him. He was looking out the window. Asterisk, "You heard that?" Asterisk, he said. "Yeah," I said. Asterisk, "I did." Asterisk. He didn't say anything else for a while. "I needed to think first," I said. Asterisk, "That's all." Asterisk. Asterisk, "Are you still angry?" Asterisk. "No," I said. And I meant it by then. The anger had burned through cleanly and left something quieter in its place. Asterisk. "But I need you to know something, Caleb. The truck, the job, the way I've lived. I made those choices because I was building something real. The kind of thing that doesn't disappear when the money changes. You'll understand that more as you get older." Asterisk. He nodded slowly. Then, asterisk, Dorian and Mom broke up. Asterisk. I kept my eyes on the road. Asterisk, I heard. Asterisk. Asterisk, he stopped coming around a couple months ago. Mom says he got what he wanted and moved on. Asterisk. Caleb's voice was carefully flat in the way teenagers go flat when they're feeling something they don't quite know what to do with. Asterisk. She cries sometimes at night. She thinks I can't hear, but I can. Asterisk. I exhaled slowly. "I'm sorry about that," I said. And I genuinely was. Not for Elena's sake exactly. Not anymore. But because Caleb was caught in the middle of consequences he hadn't created. "You knew this would happen," he said. It wasn't an accusation. It was more like recognition. "I suspected," I said. Asterisk. Dorian has never built anything in his life. He doesn't know how to. He gravitates toward things that look good and moves on when they stop looking easy. Asterisk. Caleb absorbed this. Then, quietly, asterisk, "I was an idiot." Asterisk. "You were 14, I said. Asterisk, "There's a difference." Asterisk. Meanwhile, the East Side development was moving. My team was performing. We were weeks in and on schedule, which in construction is practically miraculous. Word travels fast in contracting circles, and I was getting calls about future projects. 2 smaller jobs I was able to subcontract to trusted colleagues while maintaining oversight. But Logan Harrow Construction was turning into something real, documented, and mine. I had also made a quiet phone call to the regional licensing board. Dorian, in his various real estate activities, had a licensed agency operating under his name. One of the mutual family members, my cousin on the other side, a woman who had zero patience for what Dorian had done, had mentioned something interesting in passing about a property transaction where the disclosures hadn't been entirely accurate. I passed that information to the appropriate regulatory body without drama or announcement. I didn't follow up publicly. I just let the regulatory machinery do what regulatory machinery does. Sometime later, I heard through the same family network that Dorian's agency had been investigated and 2 of his listed properties were under dispute. He had settled one complaint at considerable personal cost, and the second was still pending. He was not, at this point, the smooth and effortless figure who had sat in my kitchen drinking my beer. He was a man managing multiple expensive problems. His social media, which I checked precisely once, out of what I'll admit was plain human curiosity, had gone quiet. No more photographs of restaurant openings. No more European weekends. Elena, separated from Dorian and managing Caleb alone on a significantly reduced budget now that I was no longer the household income, had reached out twice. Once to ask if I would consider some amendment to the financial arrangement. I referred her to Patricia, who handled it appropriately. The second time she called me directly, and I answered because it was about Caleb's school schedule. At the end of that call, after we'd sorted out the logistics, she said, "Logan, just my name," and then a pause. Asterisk, I made terrible mistakes. Asterisk. Yes, I said. Asterisk, I don't expect. I know there's nothing to fix. I just want you to know that I know. Asterisk. I held the phone for a moment. Then I said, asterisk, thank you for saying that. Take care of Caleb. Asterisk. And I ended the call. I did not feel triumph in that moment. I felt something closer to the relief of a chapter genuinely concluding. The proposal happened on a Saturday evening in April. We were at Lily's family's house on the coast. Her parents had invited us for the weekend. Her father, a man named Gerald Calloway, who shook hands like he meant it and asked questions like he actually wanted the answers, had taken me for a walk along the cliff path that afternoon and said, without any particular ceremony, asterisk, I think you're good for her, and I think she's good for you. That's rarer than people realize. Asterisk. I asked Lily that evening on the terrace with the water below us and the last of the sun cutting gold through the clouds. I had the ring in my jacket pocket, modest by Calloway standards, I suppose, but I had chosen it myself, and it was real, and it was mine to give. She saw it before I'd finished asking, and she was already saying yes. We were married 7 months later. The wedding was not a spectacle. She didn't want one, and neither did I. 60 people. A restored barn venue outside the city that we'd both noticed on a drive months before and quietly filed away. Her family, my family, a careful selection of people who were genuinely in our lives. Caleb was there, standing beside me, which was the part one had hoped for the most. He had asked if he could be my best man, and I had said yes immediately. On the day, he wore his suit seriously, handed me the ring without dropping it, and later danced badly and happily at the reception. And I thought that whatever damage had been done was not permanent. He was 15 now. He was learning things. Dorian was not invited. Obviously, he had sent a message to my personal number a month before the wedding. I still don't know how he'd heard about it, though the family network was extensive. The message said, asterisk, I hear congratulations are in order. I hope you know I never meant for things to go the way they did with Elena. I hope we can find a way past this someday. Asterisk. I read it once. Then I deleted it. There was nothing in me that needed to respond. The first, and, to date, only time I saw Dorian after everything was completely by accident. It was a Tuesday, which I find bleakly appropriate given how Tuesdays seem to feature in this whole story. I was coming out of a meeting with a building inspector downtown, and he was coming out of a coffee shop across the street. He looked smaller. That's the only way I can put it. Physically, he was the same size, but the ease had gone out of him. The room-filling confidence had contracted to something more careful and watchful. His coat was slightly less precisely pressed than I remembered. He saw me before I saw him, and when I looked up and our eyes met, he stopped. I stopped too, because I am not the kind of man who crosses a street to avoid someone. I let the moment be what it was. He came across to me. I waited. He looked at me with the expression of a man trying to locate himself in a situation he had once been certain he understood. Logan, he said. Asterisk, you look well. Asterisk. I am well, I said. He glanced at my left hand, the ring, and something moved across his face that I won't categorize. I heard about the wedding, he said. Lily Calloway, that's, he stopped. Started again. Asterisk, you've done well for yourself. Asterisk. I've done the work, I said simply. Asterisk, same as always. Asterisk. He nodded. Then, asterisk. I need you to know I'm sorry for what happened with Elena. With your family. I behaved. Asterisk, he stopped again. Asterisk, it was wrong. I knew it was wrong. I did it anyway. Asterisk. I looked at him for a moment. This was the moment the story always promises. The moment where the man who lost everything stands in front of the man who rebuilt himself, and the accounting happens. I had imagined it differently in the early days. I had imagined wanting to say a great many things. What I actually felt was very little. Not contempt exactly. Not satisfaction. Something closer to the mild pity you feel for a person who has spent their whole life mistaking circumstance for character and is now discovering the difference. You didn't take anything from me that wasn't already lost, Dorian, I said. Asterisk. Elena had already made her choices. Caleb is finding his way. My life is better than it has ever been. So the apology is noted, but I want you to understand that it's not actually for my benefit. Asterisk. He looked at me. Something in his face seemed to deflate a little further. Take care of yourself, I said. And then I walked to my car. I did not look back. Let me give you the picture of my life now. 2 years after that Tuesday afternoon when I stood in a hallway with a cold cup of coffee and felt the door close. The East Side development was completed on time and celebrated by the city as a significant urban renewal achievement. My company had 2 permanent employees and a roster of trusted contractors. We had 3 projects in progress and 2 more in tender. A regional construction industry association had recognized Logan Harrow Construction with an award for project delivery excellence, and I had stood at a podium, said thank you, and felt the specific and grounded satisfaction of recognition you have actually earned. Lily had expanded the Callaway Holdings residential portfolio into a new district, a project we had collaborated on from the first sketch to the final inspection. Working alongside your partner on something real and consequential is a particular kind of intimacy. You learn how they handle pressure and disagreement and the 100 small defeats that any complex project involves. And if they handle it well, you love them more specifically than before. She handled it magnificently. Caleb was 16 and a half and had begun, in the gradual, unspectacular way of genuine change, to become a different kind of person than he was at 14. He asked questions now instead of making pronouncements. He had gotten a part-time job on weekends, unprompted, his own idea, working at a hardware store, which I found quietly wonderful. He told me once that he'd started to understand what I had meant about building things that last. I didn't make a speech about it. I just said I was glad. He was with us most weekends now, choosing it, which I never took for granted. Elena had, from what Caleb told me, and from what I could observe in brief handoff interactions, settled into a more honest version of herself. She was working full-time. She had made, by all accounts, no further catastrophic choices in her personal life. She was raising Caleb with a kind of sobered steadiness that I respected, even now, even across the distance of everything that had happened. I did not hate her. I had stopped hating her relatively early, which surprised me at first, and then didn't. Hate is heavy, and I had better things to carry. Dorian was living in a smaller apartment and managing a reduced portfolio after the regulatory difficulties. The family spoke about him less, and when they did, it was with a complicated mix of affection and disappointment that I suspected would outlast any particular story we told about him. He had not, as far as I knew, found anything or anyone worth staying for. That was between him and whatever he chose to make of it. I stood one evening in the apartment Lily and I had bought together. Our apartment, now full of evidence of 2 lives combining. Her books alongside my technical manuals. A photograph of the coast where I'd proposed, hanging in the hallway. Caleb's spare shoes by the door. And I thought about the hallway of my old rented house. The cold coffee. The voices in the kitchen. I thought about Patricia Wren across a desk telling me to be patient. I thought about Lily on a construction site, asking a question about load-bearing structures and actually listening to the answer. I thought about Caleb saying, with the awkward honesty of a kid learning to be better, I was an idiot. I thought about Dorian's face on a Tuesday street, smaller than I'd remembered. What I felt was not triumph exactly. Triumph is about the other person losing. What I felt was something more interior than that. The specific piece of a man who went through fire and found on the other side of it that he was still himself. Still steady. Still capable of building. I had been called boring Logan once, in a kitchen, by people who thought steadiness was the same as limitation. What they hadn't understood was this. Steady is what stays. Steady is what you build on. And steady is what you come back to when everything else burns down. Lily called from the next room. and I went to her. The evening was warm. The city was lit below us. Caleb was coming in the morning. I had work I was proud of and a future that was genuinely mine. I wouldn't change a single thing, not even the cold coffee. Every door that closed led me here. And here is exactly where I am supposed to be.